NSFW. What is the best NSFW historical fact you know? My understanding is that most common folk throughout much of history had very meager lodgings, and most families would sleep together both for warmth as well as the simple fact that they didn't have the space for people to sleep separately. If mom and dad were in the mood to procreate, the rest of the family was just there. F registered sign Lix Faure, French president from 1895 to 1899, died of a seizure while getting a blowjob. The ancient city of Alexandria had one of the most famous red light districts, brothels, in the world. Once the prostitutes went on a strike and the economy of the city was at risk, so Cleopatra consulted one of the wise men in the library, and he suggested that they build another district as a competitor. Then they had two districts and the prostitutes of the first district had to end their strike. The Pompeii graffiti. It's full of your mom jokes. X ducked Y here, and I ate here. Some of my favorites. Theophilus. Don't perform oral sex on girls against the city wall like a dog. I screwed the barmaid. Atimitus got me pregnant. Secundus likes to screw boys. I screwed a lot of girls here. Just goes to show you that this kind of humor is universal. The first thing the father of microbiology, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, put under a microscope was semen. They understood that semen was integral to the creation of life but didn't yet understand the concept of single-cell organisms. Benjamin Franklin enjoyed older women. So much so he endorsed getting one as his mistress, giving reasons such as they can't have children and that the sex was just as good, if not better, than courting a young woman. Sample of a letter James Joyce wrote his wife. More than my sweet little whorish Nora, I did as you told me, you dirty little girl, and pulled myself off twice when I read your letter. I am delighted to see that you do like being ducked arseways. Yes, now I can remember that night when I ducked you for so long backwards. It was the dirtiest ducking I ever gave you. Darling, European women of the 17th century would bear one or both breasts as a sign of virtue. They often used wet nurses in order to preserve their breasts for public display. Nicholas Machiavelli, author of The Prince, gave this description of a prostitute who was reportedly so ugly he threw up on her. More than what the hell. Luigi, you can see what fortune can do to men. You had just finished ducking your woman when you want another one. I've been in Modena for several days when I came across an old woman who washes my shirts. She asked me to come into her hovel because she wished to show me some fine shirts. Innocent prick that I am, I went in. There was a woman over in the corner. This is the shirt that I wanted to sell you, the hag said. I was terrified, but I ducked her. I found her thighs flabby and her cunt damp. Her breath stank, but I was horny. When I was finished I took a torch and looked at her. I nearly dropped dead. The woman was ugly. She had a tuft of hair on her head but her head was bald. Her forehead was scarred. One eye looked up, the other down. Her eyes were filled with mucus, and she had no eyebrows. Her nose was twisted into a funny shape. Her mouth looked like Lorenzo de Medici's but was bent to one side. She was toothless and saliva drooled out of her mouth. Her upper lip had a moustache. I looked at her stupefied. "What's the matter, sir?" she asked me. As soon as she opened her mouth, such a stench came out that my eyes and my nose were assaulted and my stomach indignant. They could not bear it, and I vomited all over her. The painter John Ruskin supposedly broke up with his wife after seeing her naked because he was too disgusted to consummate the marriage. She then married another artist. It's believed that this is most likely because she had pubic hair, and he didn't realize that was normal because he had only seen nude classical statues and children. Full stop. Lyndon Johnson supposedly got a Secret Serviceman to stand in front because he had to pee and be shielded from view. Lyndon Johnson purposefully peed on the Secret Serviceman's leg knowing full and well he wouldn't budge. Saint Lawrence was martyred on a gridiron. His last words were, "I'm well done on this side. Turn me over." He's now the patron saint of cooks and comedians. I'm not making any of this up. Roman Emperor Commodus had a harem of 300 women and men and spent most of his time there. The first vibrating dildo was diesel powered. A teenager in Plymouth Plantation ducked a bunch of farm animals. He was hanged till dead and all the animals were slaughtered. Not so much as historically as biblical. According to the Bible, right when Jesus is getting arrested by the Romans, a random unnamed naked guy just runs past everyone. He is never mentioned again, and it is unknown why they even put in the Bible. It's Mark 14:51-52 if you want to check it out. Belarus, World War II. A high-ranking Nazi officer had a brothel concubine set up. Obviously, not consensual. Well, some of the ladies didn't like the situation and didn't like Nazis, so they put a landmine under his mattress. I call it the Belarusian space program. William the Conqueror allegedly smashed his testicles on the pommel of his horse's saddle, which eventually killed him. But that's not the end of it. During his funeral ceremony, they had placed him in a stone coffin sarcophagus thing. It was unusually hot that day and his body swelled. Well, the coffin did not. So during his funeral, where he died by smashing his nuts, his body exploded. In 1820s Scotland, medical cadavers were in such high demand and worth so much money that two men, William Burke and William Hare, went into business together, murdering people and selling the bodies to local universities. By the time their scheme was uncovered, 16 people had been killed. Wikipedia link. Edit. So now my top 2 posts are about a pair of serial killers and the time that the Count from Sesame Street was accidentally referred to by a profane name. That seems about right. Best. I would not call this best, but it's certainly stuck with me since I learned it in class. In ancient Greece, it was believed that if a girl doesn't lose her virginity by her first period, she would fill up with blood to the point where her eyes would turn red, and she would hear voices telling her to jump into wells. Or, at least, it was written in one Greek doctor's writings. There's no real evidence how widely it was believed. Edit. Found the source on this. The past is a crazy place. 18th century Empress of Russia Catherine the Great employed foot ticklers to turn her on. In ancient Greece, prostitutes used to press "follow me" into their sandals so that when they walked it would imprint into the dirt or sand. So when people saw it, they'd know that they could follow the trail and it would end in a prostitute and maybe some sex. There's a sculpture I love called the Slipper Slapper that shows Aphrodite and Pan. And she is, edit, my bad, this is not true, holding a sandal with "follow me" on the bottom. Big edit. Sorry. I appear to have misunderstood a professor and then didn't follow up before posting. The Slipper Slapper is a beautiful sculpture, but does not have "follow me" studied on the bottom in Greek. My bad for not researching the statue more before posting. Mathematician Kurt Gödel suffered from mental illness and was paranoid he was going to be poisoned. He would only eat food his wife had prepared for him. In 1977, she was hospitalized for 6 months and could no longer prepare his food. In her absence, he refused to eat and eventually starved to death. He only weighed 65 pounds when he died. George Washington, in his youth, was a handsome, strapping young man that all the women and officers' wives wanted to screw. Our founding father was a bit of a poonhound. A merkin is a replacement wig for pubic hairs prostitutes used to use after they shaved theirs due to pubic lice. The one about Gandhi regularly group bathing, group sleeping, cuddling, and getting strip teases and lap dances from really young women. One of which was his grand, or great grand, I can't recall, niece, to test his sexual restraint or whatever, lol. Hitler had the hots for his niece Jelly Rorbel, 17-23 years old, who was found dead in her bedroom after she shot herself in the chest with his own gun, noting the fact that she lived with him until 1931. There are a lot of controversial aspects to that story, but also a lot of interesting pieces of information. Some historians speculate that they had a bizarre relationship and that, probably, she was the love of his life. He mourned her death for a week locked in her bedroom, denied food and wanted to kill himself. After that he kept her room as a shrine and kept her memories with him until near his death. Ottoman Padishah Selim II died by stepping on a soap and falling while chasing girls in his harem. In the war for Texas independence against Mexico, after the Battle of the Alamo, there was this Mexican woman who was a spy for Texas. Nicknamed the Yellow Rose of Texas, she went and seduced the Mexican General Santa Anna, and while they were hooking up, the Texans did a surprise attack and slaughtered many Mexicans and won the war. Probably got some facts wrong lol. After Nero, how can you have a NSFW history thread without naming him? Kicked his wife to death. He met a young boy named Sporus. According to some, Sporus held somewhat of a resemblance to Nero's late, killed, wife, Poppaea, and so Nero had the boy castrated and married him. During the marriage, they appeared in public as a happy couple as Nero paraded his new bride around to Greece and then back to Rome where he had married another guy named Pythagoras, not the maths guy. Nero called Pythagoras his husband and called Sporus his wife. Sporus was labeled the Empress. A lot of people think that Nero took to Sporus because of the guilt he felt for kicking his wife to death, as he even called Sporus Poppaea, the wife he kicked to death. Needless to say, Nero had issues and his classic NSFW history. He ran the gamut of MFK with his mom, killed his wife, castrated boys who looked like his dead, murdered wife and kept them around for his pleasure guilt, married strong dudes, not that there's anything wrong with that, and ended up killing himself. I'm positive a lot of his history is propaganda, and I recognize how mental illness still goes diagnosed in today's world, not to mention the ancient world. Also, trying to look through the anti-Nero and revisions to find the truth is supremely challenging, but damn, that it is ducked. In 2017, Oscar Wilde was among an estimated 50,000 men who were pardoned for homosexual acts that were no longer considered offenses under the Policing and Crime Act 2017. The act is known informally as the Alan Turing Law, not that it matters to Mr. Wilde now, but 130 years is a long time to wait to have your name cleared. Don't know if it's true, but my history teacher told me about this one prostitute that got out of dying or something by showing the judges her boobs, claiming it would be against gods to destroy something so beautiful. Mary Shelley lost her virginity on her mother's grave. Pretty sure Salvador Dali took imprints of a lot of people's asshole folds and made the shocking discovery that each and every butthole fold that exists is unique in its foldiness. When Victor Hugo died, all the prostitutes in Paris took a holiday to mourn him. They all got to know him pretty well, if you know what I mean. In the 1840s, England had a parliamentary investigation into women working in coal mines. Not about the frequent deaths, men and women, or the conditions, horrible, working there, and not even that the women worked bare-chested alongside the men, but over the fact that the women wore trousers while doing so. Napoleon loved the dirty puss. In his letters to Josephine, he instructed her not to bathe for over a month, until he returned home, so he could wallow in the stank. Here is a sampling of his letters, but you can read them in full, online. Give it a Google if you want to hear all about the man's love for the lusty ham wallet. Fath Ali Shah Qajar, second king in Qajar dynasty in Iran, about 200 years ago, had 160 wives. Nasiruddin Shah Qajar had about 50. In Islam, you're not allowed to marry more than 4 wives at the same time. It is said that Nasiruddin Shah was once walking in his palace and saw a beautiful girl, and asked if he could marry her. Everyone was looking at him weirdly and he asked why. One of his servants said that she was his daughter. An octopus will tear its own cock off only to launch it at a female octopus, and the female will perform a 6 act with the severed member. The oldest known objects that were probably 6 toys were made out of stone and animal dung car. 30k years ago, the oldest known objects that were definitely 6 toys were anatomically shaped jade and bronze dildos butt plugs dating back 3000 years. Not to NSFW, but Mozart has a piece of music called Lick My Ass. Chief Buffalo Hump, as he was referred to in English, was not a literal translation of his Comanche name, which was erection that won't go down, Pochanak Warhip. Elizabeth Bathory was a countess who lived in the Carpathian Mountains. She was one of the inspirations of Dracula and her nickname was Countess Dracula. She was possibly the most prolific serial killer in history. She believed that blood on her skin made her fresher and younger. She was responsible for the killing of 650 girls. Many were tortured for weeks and were often naked when they were tortured. They were forced to eat their own flesh. She sometimes drank the blood of the girls and stabbed them with needles. Some had their face, Hands and private parts burned and bit their flesh and private parts. Many of them starved to death. Others were burned or froze to death naked. She might have eaten some of her servants. It is possible that she bathed in blood. She was never put on trial, but was forced to stay in one room for the rest of her life. She died 4 years later. King Edward II of England was apparently tortured before death, which included shoving a red-hot poker up his bum to burn his insides out whilst alive. There does remain some debate about this, but I was taught this in school. The inventor of the modern bra had a dog named Clitoris. Pedicabo ego vos eteramabo, a classic line of Latin poetry, and the first thing I say when people ask me to say something in Latin. It means I'll sodomize and seduce you. It was written by the famous poet Catullus, who also did the whole Million Kisses poem everyone needs to translate in Latin class. Cleopatra bathed in spunk. Large portions of Anne Frank's diary were about periods and masturbation. Hitler's left nut was there, but it was smaller than the right one. Charles II, Charles the Impotent, was the convergence point for several generations of royal inbreeding and was born with significant disabilities. His parents were desperate for him to produce an heir. They implemented a system of ropes and pulleys to lower virgins onto him in hopes he could impregnate one. It didn't work and the dynasty collapsed. While receiving oral sex in hot tubs, JFK would hold women's heads underwater during climax. His back pains were so severe Secret Service helped him out of the tub. We can trace the path the Lewis and Clark expedition took by the mercury in the ground from their latrines. Why is there mercury? It was a syphilis treatment. They needed it due to their men ducking everything they could, like the wives and daughters of the natives they encountered. Source: Elagabalus is my favorite. Super young Roman emperor who also was a transsexual prostitute. From Wiki, Cassius Dio reported that Elagabalus would paint his eyes, depilate his body hair and wear wigs before prostituting himself in taverns, brothels, and even in the imperial palace. Finally, he set aside a room in the palace and there committed his indecencies, always standing nude at the door of the room, as the harlots do, and shaking the curtain which hung from gold rings, while in a soft and melting voice he solicited the passers-by. There were, of course, men who had been specially instructed to play their part. For, as in other matters, so in this business, too, he had numerous agents who sought out those who could best please him by their foulness. He would collect money from his patrons and give himself airs over his gains. He would also dispute with his associates in this shameful occupation, claiming that he had more lovers than they and took in more money. Murdered at 18 by his own guards and thrown in the sewer. Then they went so far as to remove his name from all temples and remove all traces of him from society. Mongols used to duck their horses. They liked it so much they even commissioned paintings about it. I heard at some point Benjamin Franklin was in a Six cult or something like that. Carpetophorus, a Roman gladiator, trained giraffes and other animals to abuse women to entertain the Colosseum crowds. Jean-Paul Marat refused to refer to Marie Antoinette by her name in any of his publications. Instead, he simply referred to her as, quote, that Austrian whore. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a letter to a friend of his detailing how he ducked an ugly old woman after she washed his clothes. King Edward VI of England had an elaborate sixth chair. Masturbation was once a prescribed form of relief for female schizophrenia. The term beaver comes from colonial times when prostitutes would use a beaver pelt to cover themselves due to shaving off their pubic hair because they had crabs. Anne Hathaway was 3 months pregnant when she married William Shakespeare. That Aboriginal Australians would dispose of unwanted babies by filling their mouths full of sand and leaving them to die. Back in the time of Caribbean pirates, there would be little splits in the wood on the deck, and they looked like V's and their actual name was cunt, and that's the origin of the word cunt. I remember reading something like Hans Christian Andersen kept a masturbation diary, often visited prostitutes just to chat, after which he masturbated and then wrote about it, was possibly bi, and likely died a virgin. I want to say that there is a theory or something that The Little Mermaid was inspired by a man that HCA loved, but who didn't love him. Not entirely NSFW or sourced, but you know. Before Christian missionaries converted them to Christianity, the following was true in the native culture of Papua New Guinea. It was believed that the essence of manliness or machismo was contained in a man's semen. Therefore, young boys who were about to go through puberty were encouraged to swallow as much of it as possible. And they did. Hey, it was part of their culture. Who are you to judge? Source: Psych 101 textbook talking about the relativity of social norms. An example of what Westerners would consider shocking and wrong but was normal in those tribes. Supposedly, Rasputin had a huge dong. Technical term. There was a man who was briefly emperor of Rome, and his name was Pupienus Maximus. To this day I cannot stop giggling about it. Buckle up. The story goes that Attila used to collect exotic animals that he found during his conquests. He particularly liked dangerous or fearsome animals, and his favorite was a giant snake. He was so fond of it, it was said that he brought it with him on every campaign. But his snake lost its appetite, and soon stopped eating altogether, perhaps due to the stress of frequent travel and an irregular diet. Wishing to save his prized pet, Attila sought help from the local chirurgeons and witch doctors. None of them could do anything for him, until a wizened sage suggested feeding the serpent only young female virgins. Attila was pleased with this idea, and was delighted to find that a city he had raided just happened to have a Christian convent with a convenient supply of the recommended food for his pet. But the snake refused to eat, or even touch any of the consecrated virgins from the convent. Enraged, Attila sent for the soothsayer who advised him to have him executed. Standing before Attila, the old man calmly said, "Before thou killest me, may thee first bring the snake and one of the women to me." Curious, Attila did as he asked. Then the old man took some bread and gave it to Attila. "Now hold these in both hands," he instructed. Attila did so, and as soon as he did, the snake let out a terrifying hiss, and swallowed the virgin whole. To an amazed Attila, the old man simply said, "I anaconda don't want none unless you've got buns, hun." The man that killed Hitler had sexual relations with Hitler's mistress. Cornflakes were marketed and thought up as a cure for masturbation. I was pretty surprised when I found out samurai would have consensual homosexual relationships with their apprentices. The younger man would even dress like a woman. Also, feudal Japanese pictures had some pretty massive cocks. Lyndon Johnson had a comically large D that he would whip out in public with no provocation. Going back and forth with the Kennedys, he once whipped out his D to prove he had no reason to be intimidated by them. In ancient Egypt, a god's wife was an honor typically given to high priestesses or pharaoh's first wife, the queen. This honor was solely for the woman to devote a part of her morning to pleasuring a pure golden statue of a god, typically Amen when this was practiced, although many other gods received the same treatment. That's right folks. The most elite women of ancient Egypt ducked a gold statue every morning from a range of 12 to whenever they died. Author James Joyce wrote love letters to his wife that were filled with some really interesting stuff. Here's an excerpt. "You had an ass full of farts that night, darling, and I ducked them out of you. Big fat fellows, long windy ones, quick little merry cracks and a lot of tiny little naughty farters ending in a long gush from your hole. It is wonderful to duck a farting woman when every duck drives one out of her. I think I would know Nora's fart anywhere. I think I could pick hers out in a room full of farting women. Here's some more. Enjoy." It. Facts but no sources. Ben Franklin was a dirty old man. He would sit at windows, fully nude, and flirt with nearly every woman that crossed his path. He also frequented brothels,